All right. Wow, I have not used this in such a long time. The live stream thing. I mean, well, typically I don't really use it often, only because it's not really a good way for your videos to kind of spread, but that's just what I've heard. Also, there is so much sunlight. I mean, I love sunlight, but I didn't think it was going to be that much sunlight. So, right, how do I begin? So this video that I'm making today, sorry to say, I guess it's somewhat serious in a sense. This is something that I've been wanting to make for a while now. So, don't expect any kind of like, you know, fun stuff or anything like that. A lot of stuff that we're going to talk about is pretty serious in a sense. It's supposed to kind of explain a little bit as to like what's been kind of going on a little bit, like especially during like my absence from YouTube and stuff. And, of course, I wanted to get my chest off of, a few things. What I will say, and this is very important for people to understand, I get it, right? Listen, the internet is not your diary, all right? It's not an obligation to talk about every single little thing that happens in your life. I'm just gonna put that out there right now because I know it kind of seems like it with this video because, like I said, there's gonna be a couple of personal things here and there, but I also wanted to, I guess, sort of use this as a bit of a, like a learning tool, especially since if you feel like I'm not saying that if you're ever in my situation, but if you're ever stuck somewhere where you think that you're the only one dealing with this type of stuff, and you're not, that's kind of the whole point of why I'm sort of doing this. What I will say is I'm going to be leaving out a couple of things that are very personal, obviously, and of course for privacy's sake. There's a all I can say is that there's probably some stuff that I'm going to mention that I should not be mentioning, but that's kind of where we're at, really. So I guess we'll start a little bit about what happened last year, in a sense, towards the end. So as you guys know, I moved. My old home. That's about it, really. Of course, we moved out, and honestly, like I say, I don't know every single thing that happened around the time because honestly, as dumb as this might sound, I don't even know whose decision it was to sold the house to begin with. And the only reason why I don't know it's because it was just one of those things where the whole thing, I was listening in on the whole thing. There was a lot of people that were involved with this, and honestly, it was just stressing me out so much to where I was like, you know what, don't tell me anything, just give me bullet points and stuff like that, and that's about it. I just didn't really want to know about what's kind of been going on, really. Uh, yeah, so like I said, I don't know whose decision it was. Now, again, I'm going to be leaving out some people. I'm going to be leaving out a couple things because, like I said, I feel like if I were to say a lot more about what happened, I not only would I probably get myself in trouble, but I probably get some other people in trouble as well. So it's better if I just don't say too much specifically as to like who's who. Basically, what's been happening with my old house is it's an old home. It's been falling apart for a while. It needed some fixes here and there. I mean, those had a lot of problems. Sometimes when it rains, you had water leaking through the ceiling. The house, it was always, it was like cold during the winter, but like cold. Basically, the house wasn't really insulated properly. For the most part, it wasn't really built strong enough to handle harsh winter. So every time, it comes by, it was always such a huge struggle for my family. I mean, me, I could tolerate it to a certain extent, but obviously my parents are old, so I can understand their frustration. And there's a whole lot of other stuff too. A lot, like I said, there's a lot more to it. The only thing I can really say is that for the most part, I believe what probably ended up happening was that it was just probably more easier to just sell the house altogether. I'm guessing that's probably what happened during the whole thing was that, instead of trying to fix these problems, which only accumulated more and more money getting spent, I'm assuming that that's probably why they reached the conclusion to just kind of sell it all together. And for the most part, it seems like everybody was in agreement. And what I mean by everybody, I mean everybody that also lived on the top floors and all that. And then I don't know what happened after. Everyone just kind of started kind of, I wouldn't say attacking each other, but let's just say they weren't really. At some point, they didn't like the idea. It's almost like for some odd reason, they also wanted to kind of fight not selling the house, but the process was already done. Now, here comes sort of the next thing, right? So, of course, there's the whole looking for a home now, which obviously, and we're going to get serious for a minute, we all know that ever since COVID, it's been pretty hard to find a home, a decent home at a good price and stuff. I can only imagine. So us looking for a new place, it was a huge headache for sure. I mean, my mother, she tried looking, my dad tried looking, I was of course busy with school and work, so it probably, it was a lot going on, obviously, and it didn't really get any better. A lot of the places that we found, it's like whenever we did find a decent place, the problem was that they were just too far away. So it'd be difficult for both me and my mother working and stuff because she works out another town. She don't work, around here. So it's not easy for her. Not to mention with my dad, he's sick too. He has a lot of health issues. So he doesn't necessarily work exactly, if that makes sense. So it's pretty hard for him to really, do a lot more. He can only really do so much that he can, and like I said, me, unfortunately, I just watched everything for the most part. That's sort of where I was during this whole thing. So one day, I mean, the thing is though, the other problem, we were under a time crunch too. So we had to like hurry up really quickly. It wasn't just something that we could just sort of do on the fly. Finding a home like that and then trying to, get in touch with the homeowners and all that, that's not as easy as it seems. It really isn't, and of course I want this, of course, to be like, for anyone that wants to find a new home and stuff like that, I'm just telling you right now, that's just not easy. There's that's a lot of money involved and a huge process and a lot of people you gotta talk to. So there goes a life lesson for you there. And then one day, literally out of nowhere, out of all the people that helped us, I mean, our neighbor, out of everyone, he was like, hey, I got an apartment that's available that you could rent and stuff. And would you be surprised that the home that he was talking about was literally the one next door to our house? So it's like, oh, it's almost like we could literally just move right next door. So, okay, I don't know how that's going to work out. So, and at first I was like, come on, no. Because the thing is, though, I live in a really bad neighborhood. But I mean, like, really bad. I know you probably hear that a lot from time to time. But listen, I'm just going to say it. It's not nice walking out and then it's like almost every single person asks you for money. And mind you, I get that people are struggling right now, but like the thing is though, where I live, it's like, it's hard to really tell between who's genuine and then who's just wanting cash to just use it for drugs. That's kind of where things get a little bit tricky. I mean, not to get off topic, but like years and years ago, my parents, it was like from a distance, they went to like a McDonald's and they can see like a homeless guy and somebody felt bad for him. So they gave him like a burger only for literally the guy to just throw the burger on the floor. So it's like, oh, okay. So he wasn't asking for food. He was probably asking for money or for a crack or something. So it's like, yeah. And on top of that, there's a huge, ginormous like prostitution problem around here too. It's like it's everywhere, and it's disgusting, And on top of that, cars speeding by, there's no lights either. So listen, once in a while there is a car crash. So listen, one of the objectives of moving out of here is that it gave us the opportunity to at least just maybe, we can finally get out here and move somewhere a lot more safer, maybe somewhere around downtown or whatever like that. And the thing is, though, there were times where we were pretty close to finding a home, a nice, decent place, but money was the biggest thing too. We would have to pay a lot of rent and stuff. It wasn't affordable pretty much. And like I said, whenever we were just close, there were times where we actually found a place that was like perfect, but then it gets taken pretty quick. So where my neighbor comes into play. Well, one day, my parents were like, "Hey, we're gonna go check this out. You want to come see it with us?" And I was like, "Nah, I really didn't want to. I didn't. I'm like, come on now, will you?" And then, my mother, she would tell me, it doesn't mean that we're actually gonna buy it, but we had to at least look at it because he wanted us to. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll go check out the apartment. And my full honest thoughts, I'm gonna say it, I didn't really like it at first. I really didn't. I was pretty upset, but I think it was because the realization didn't hit me yet exactly, as to like moving and all that. I mean, obviously the entire place was empty, obviously. So it's like, I mean, it seemed big, it seemed small, it was a lot of things going on in my mind. So I was like, okay, I don't know. I wasn't too keen on it. Although for some reason, I think I was like more mad than anything else. Cause I was like, I really don't want to like, I wasn't too comfortable with it, obviously, And then the next thing you know, I found out that my parents had accepted the offer to take the apartment already. So it's like, wait, so this is actually happening. We're gonna move to the apartment. I'm like, wait a minute, but we're still gonna be in the same neighborhood. And on top of that, it's an apartment. So it's like, my mother, she doesn't even have parking. So it's like, wow. The thing is, though, we lost a lot of things too. I mean, we used to have like a garage and stuff. We had a basement. We have none of that now. So a lot of stuff that we had kind of throw away and stuff. But that's sort of later down the line during like November, December or so. And we had the talk, and then it was like, it's not that it's not what we wanted, but it's that was just sort of the option we had. It's like we tried, they tried hard to find a good place, and they just couldn't. So I was all we could really afford. So it as you can imagine, that's when things start to kind of get set in stone, where it's like, okay, now we have to start getting ready to pack up and all that. So literally, I am not joking, the new place that we moved to is literally right next to my house. So as I'm sitting here right now in my window, I can literally see our house from across from here. So yeah, it's at the beginning, when I moved here and stuff, it wasn't easy. I'm just kind of looking, and it's like, wow, I can't believe that used to be our home. And of course, obviously, with that, there was a lot of tension going on here as well. It was like, because we were in a bit of a rush to move, let's just say we were supposed to get help, for both the cost and the moving process. We were supposed to have people helping us and stuff. Let's just say we didn't get any help at all. So the people that was moving the stuff was literally me and my father. So it's like, okay, that's a huge kick in the nuts. So it's like, okay. And mind you, it really was just us. I mean, my mother, it was very hard for her to kind of help out because she had to work. She worked the whole week. So it was like, even after my classes finished and all that too, I was still trying to help out. So that's the thing. And mind you, we moved everything. We moved TVs, we moved cabinets, sofas, that I don't even want to think about, because during that time, me and my dad, there was these two heavy sofas that we were trying to move, but they had like the giant rings at the bottom. So he had the idea, maybe, let's bring them out through the front porch. And then unfortunately during the process, because it was so hard to grab onto this, to the sofas and stuff, literally I was on top and he was at the bottom. So what ended up happening was, because I lost my grip, sofa literally came down right on top of him, right, at the bottom. So that was like, that was definitely one of like the worst highlights when it came to the situation, where it's like, and like I said, it's like, it was only really us doing everything. And I was scared to death too. I was like, I hope nothing happened to him. It was definitely like frightening for me. It's not that it landed on top of him, but it was like he fell down a couple of stairs and he hit the concrete. So you could imagine that that's a big recipe for disaster. It's like, that's not just something that's like, I'm okay. I could just, no, it was like, I generally thought that, he was hurt pretty badly. He did kind of land on his head in a sense. I mean, luckily, eventually, he did get it checked out and everything turned out fine, but still, it was like, it wasn't a good situation. It was bad. So luckily my dad, and I'm I'm forever thankful for my aunt, because at least he had the right idea to actually, call her. And then, her and her husband actually did came, and she did help us a lot, and she helped, they helped us move most of the heavy stuff. So that was like, it's like a beauty in disguise. I was like, wow, like out of all the people that we would have never expected to help us, I mean, they helped us big time. So I think if it wasn't for them, we'd be kind of screwed in a sense, because like I said, we were under a time crunch. And to give you an idea as to what was going on, now mind you, I mean, we didn't celebrate Thanksgiving, we didn't celebrate Christmas, so it's like everything was just off the rails. It really was every single day, just, okay, we're going to move this, we're going to move that. And like I said, that's easier said than done. And I forgot to mention this, we moved to the second floor of the apartment. So of course we had a whole flight of stairs that we had to bring everything in such a small hallway. And because it's an apartment, you could probably imagine too, you couldn't really, we had to be careful too. That was the worst part too. That was one of the problems with moving here, is that we had to really be careful not to damage the walls. But as you could imagine, that was pretty hard to not do, especially with one of the beds that had like the giant metal framing at the bottom. It got so bad to where it couldn't even fit through the door. We had to literally take it apart. And I mean, it was bad, that I remember too. We wasted so much time trying to bring that up, and it was terrible. And it didn't help too that it was late at night and it was cold. Remember, this happened during the winter, so it was like, really didn't help. And even, you could wear a heavy jacket all you want. It was freezing outside, so that's the thing. And since we were bringing it upstairs, obviously we had all the doors open, so it's like, we were like right in the middle too. It's like we're trying to like push it up the stair. We try to do everything we can without making any scratches or anything like that. We don't want to bust up the stairway either. So, you can imagine that was such a big challenge. And it only got more challenging later on as the days followed, and I'm just hoping for the day that this was all finally over. I mean, you guys probably saw it in some of my videos from last year that my room was just so empty. So you can imagine just kind of just sitting there, with the bed on the floor too. I'm looking around and I'm like, I want to see my stuff again. It was hard. That's the thing. We had moved everything next door too. Luckily, we had the keys, so it wasn't like anyone could just kind of sneak in and go through. And obviously, there was already people living on the first floor, so I guess we weren't really too worried about it. But obviously, that's not really a smart way of doing it, And I felt so bad for my mother too, because she really did wanted to help. I mean, she did help on occasion, but it was still really hard for her to kind of get around with everything because she worked. Because and you're probably wondering too, Josh, what about like you and work and your school and stuff, because this was happening towards the end of 2024. So you would think that well, obviously my job wouldn't have too much leniency on that, but obviously with school being out, obviously college. I mean, I could deal with it. It's not a huge problem or anything like that. It's pretty easy going, and sometimes like some classes are easier to complete than others. That's all I can really say. So that didn't interfere too much with the whole moving thing. But the thing with me and my job, well, I'm not going to say where I work, but all I can say is that the company that I worked for went bankrupt and my store was closing. So that really didn't help this whole thing at all, because you're probably wondering too, right? Financially too, like how come I didn't help my parents, with trying to help find a home and stuff like that. And it's because I literally couldn't, because I just didn't had enough money to help them out to begin with, So that's the thing. Even when I offered to help out, they pretty much said no. They didn't want me to, because they know that I'm going to be out of a job for a while. And, I lost my job officially during October. So that, yes, I had a lot of free time to help out my dad and stuff, but at the same time, now I'm no longer making any money. If you want to know who that was my dog. She opened the door with force, apparently. I don't know how she can do that. Come on, you could join. I don't know if you could see her. Here we go. There we go. Anyway, so back to what I was saying. Yeah. Now, obviously, you guys know me. I have a huge, massive collection. So as you can imagine, putting that stuff all away wasn't exactly easy. Although oddly, I was kind of the fastest packer, because literally I was literally the first one, in our home to like completely pack everything away. So for the most part, I didn't lose anything. But unfortunately, I can't really say the same for my parents. I mean, because there was just so much stuff that we needed to grab. And like I said, with no help, like I've mentioned before, there was a lot of stuff that we had to leave behind. So, a lot of my mom's old clothes, she had to leave that behind, some of the old cabinets, And my dad, I mean, even though we went through a lot, I mean, it's been a huge spiral, because there has been a lot of really rough moments during the movement, besides the whole, almost getting hurt pretty badly with the sofa incident. I'm going to say it did put a bit of a strain on both of us to an extent, and not just, physically, but I guess mentally in a sense too. I mean, I don't want to say I was verbally abused the whole time, but in a sense, obviously he wasn't really too happy. I mean, I get it. It's he was sick, so it's hard for him to do a lot of big movements like that. That's not easy for him to just kind of move a sofa like that. And it was just me. So listen, I might look good, but I'm not the strongest person in the room either. So it wasn't easy for me. It was hard for me to also move a lot of that stuff as well. So I felt bad that it was such a struggle for me too. But at the same time, it was like this is really the best that I could do. There were even times where I was like, hey, let me like let me like whenever he gets tired and stuff, let me just do it because I had the keys and stuff, but he kept hesitating. I guess he just wanted to kind of do everything himself in a sense. So I was like, you can imagine how extremely frustrated I was during the whole thing. Obviously, I was not happy. That this was generally like one of the worst moments of my life, pretty much during 2024. Being in a weird half and half, like kind of empty home, but then everything's like such a mess. I mean, my parents were literally sleeping like in the living room. And even when we took everything out, as you can imagine, the cold started to come in even more. So that really, really didn't help. It was a huge, massive mess. I mean, it was like I wouldn't really say that it was at the levels of like hoarders. It was nothing like that, but it was pretty close. I mean, we had like boxes here, we got like bins here, and it's like they were so heavy we can only really bring them, bit by bit. And I think the worst thing too is that because my mom was so busy, with her job and stuff like that, it got to a point where, of course, both my parents would argue, a lot, about, oh, you're not contributing, we've been the ones doing everything, like that. It's like, I get mad at my dad because it's like, look, she works like from like 6 to 5. Like we're talking like early AM in the morning, 6 a.m. to sometimes like 5 p.m. or so. So it's like I really wish that he was more easier on her with that because this is not an easy thing. We knew that this was going to happen. Even my mother, she said that she was going to help to try and see if she could find some movers for us. But again, my dad was just so hard headed. It was like he just didn't want any help at all at this point. And I think it was because he was just mostly frustrated with like the people that were supposed to help us. And like I said, I'm leaving out names. So, I can't really say for sure. And of course, for privacy reasons too, I can't really say who's who or who made the decision and stuff like that. But what I will say is that it was his family too, a family member per se that was involved with this who I mean, I don't want to say he kind of backstabbed my dad, but in a way he kind of did. So my dad took that pretty personal. So as you can imagine, unfortunately, even to this day, he still can't really get over it. But I guess I can't really blame him, in a way. It like I said, a lot of very personal things happen behind the scenes. I'm just not painting the whole picture because, like, I can't. And on top of that, I'm doing all this, on YouTube. So as you can imagine, again, it's the same thing with the whole, it's private, I can't just talk about someone's business like that either. And I know that I'm kind of breaking that rule doing that, but of course, obviously I had to talk a little bit about, what happened and stuff like during my absence. And of course, I'm hoping that, if you're ever in a similar situation like I am, at least know that you're not the only one because, heck, I'm a lot better now, but obviously I still struggle from time to time because I can imagine things weren't really getting any better from there. Eventually, obviously, the deadline hit. We were here. Now we were unpacking our stuff and we're trying to decide what we're gonna do, whatever. And then of course, my mother gets upset because a lot of the stuff she had a lot of stuff that she left behind. My dad, he didn't really care. He had a couple things, but I guess to him, it's like it's material things, whatever. So for him, he didn't really care if he lost some stuff here and there, as long as he had like most of his personal things with him. But my mother, I guess it's weird because she's not that type of person either. But obviously, she did kind of took this whole thing, pretty personal. But again, it's hard to really say who to blame. It's like they're not in the right, but they're not in the wrong either. Is all I can really say. So of course, obviously, everything kind of ended. And like I said, we were still moving stuff around. Like I said, we weren't really able to celebrate Thanksgiving properly, and we didn't even celebrate Christmas at all. Like at all. We were still in the other house while this was happening. It wasn't. We were able to officially move before the end of the year. So okay, at least finally New Year's come. We're hoping that at least 2025 would finally be like a nice brand new beginning. It kind of wasn't, if I'm being honest. It was just more of the same old, and things just only got worse. Obviously, my dad, he's like 1,000 times more miserable now, even more miserable than how he was in our previous home. This whole thing really did took a bit of a toll on him. I mean, he was angry before, but now he's like almost angry all the time. He almost had to kind of tiptoe around. And, I know I shouldn't be saying this type of stuff about him, but it's like, I understand on top of like, he has heart issues, he's a diabetic. So, and of course, the thing with his family and stuff like that, I can only imagine, I tried my best to like understand the best way I can, that definitely for sure, he has the right to be upset, but at the same time, I don't, you can't really take that all on us either, because we were trying to, do things normally. I mean, I've been looking for jobs and stuff like that, and I know what you're probably wondering. Oh, what about unemployment? That I can't really talk about too much, if I'm being honest. Probably because I could possibly get in trouble if I explain what happened. But all I can say is that everything's resolved now, so everything's good. So, but I still want a job. I want to work hard for my money. That's what I like to do. When I buy my stuff and all that, I like to buy it with pride. It's like, yeah, I got money. You know what I mean? Because a lot of my toy hunts that I actually did record and stuff like that, I was shopping. That was a lot of like money that I saved away. That was like my Christmas money and then like my birthday money. That's pretty much what it was. That's what I pretty much spent it all on. But everything else I have saved away, for emergencies and all that, in case they needed help with the rent and stuff like that. But then again, like I said, I don't really have that much to kind of help them. So I can only really help them the best way I can. I mean, there were times where even when we went out shopping, I would secretly buy stuff without them knowing. But I guess, I don't know. It was almost like no matter how much I did, it still didn't really fix anything. We were still a little bit weird, kind of odd financial trouble. I mean, we're fine. We're not like on the brink of like getting kicked out or anything. Nah, we're good with that right now. So, and of course, so obviously, we're in January. We're still trying to, trying to get used to the place. I mean, obviously, it took me forever, a little bit to kind of get used to this room. I mean, I set up all my stuff, but obviously, it's not the same way like how it was before. To a certain extent, I liked how my room was before. Obviously, I had everything kind of set up nicely. There's still a little bit of a work in progress. Don't get me wrong. I think what I have now is great, but there's some stuff here and there that I need to do. So don't expect a room tour yet, but I'll get there at some point. So I guess now we kind of get into some of the more, well, again, things just started getting a little more problematic in a sense. I mean, I guess, there were some sofas that we had to kind of leave behind. So my mother, I guess she bought like another one. Well, I wouldn't really say it was a sofa. I think it was like a cabinet or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but it's structured so weird because it's made in a way where like if you grabbed it the wrong way, it kind of, I don't know. I remember grabbing it and something clamped on my fingers and I got so hurt, but like I didn't say anything. I just continued to carry the item anyway. I don't know. So it was just me and my dad. Obviously he's extremely frustrated because it's like, why is she bringing in more furniture in a place that it's more smaller than our previous home? Because yes, this apartment is big in some areas, but pretty small in others. It's really hard to kind of describe it. It's pretty comfortable. Don't get me wrong. I actually like the idea of living on a second apartment because at least I know I'm kind of safe. But at the same time, there's a couple of restrictions here and there as to what we can do. So obviously that didn't really help too much. So what happened in this case when we were both carrying the item, he was not happy. He was already not happy, and okay, fine. I get it. We went through all this. So it's almost like he's kind of doing the same thing again. So it's like, I'm trying to help carry the item. And like I said, I don't know what happened. It's like something kind of clamped on and I got hurt and it made like a weird funny noise. So I guess to him, he thought that something broke. So he got mad at me because I guess he thought that I was carrying it wrong. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, and then he's like, oh, but then she's gonna blame me for this like she always does. And I'm like, I didn't, and I told him I didn't know. I got angry and I was like, what the fuck? I yelled at him, and then the next thing you know, I mean, he got pissed. But like, this is the first time, that I've ever really seen him that angry with me. Even, he was like, oh, don't fucking talk to me like that. Oh, when I come out, I'm gonna go kick your ass. And I'm like, and I was in shock. I was like, why would he do that? I don't understand. And that's the thing. I mean, of course, I got kind of, I was just a bit like in shock. I didn't. I think it didn't really hit me all. I think it didn't really hit me all the way yet. So I just kind of, I brought the item back up. I mean, he was down there. Well, he was making a huge fuss. I mean, he slammed the door. I could hear my mother like, what are you doing? Like that. I mean, I'm not gonna talk too much about what happened because that was pretty bad. I mean, what am I gonna do? I mean, I went to my room. Was I upset? Yeah. Came back and I was like, is he actually going to kick my ass? I'm like, hold up. And I know it's weird. I mean, I'm okay, fine. I'm a 23-year-old, and it's like, why am I taking that from him? But it's like, I don't know. It's just something with me where it's like, it's my father. So it's like, what can you really do in a situation like that? I just didn't know what to do. So unfortunate, I couldn't really just, And all of a sudden, he came in and he was like, what happened? Did you break anything? Whatever. And I was like, no, no. And he was like, I'm sorry, but, your mother, I'm more upset with her. I'm like, of course, obviously, after the whole thing, I mean, I'm gonna say it. Yeah, I broke down. I was like, what is this? It's like we move, and it's like everything is just kind of worse. So that was pretty terrible. I mean, eventually he did apologize, but it took me a while to kind of forgive him for that because, I mean, that those are very specific words. You don't just say it out of the blue like that. So I don't know. I feel like to a certain extent he kind of did mean it, but he knows that he was in the wrong. Unfortunately, things really, really don't get any better from there. Around February, actually, this happened on February 12th. Okay, so the spring semester had began, late January. So hopefully things will start to kind of, I think now, hopefully now, once I go out, I feel a lot more better. Hopefully I could get my mind off of everything that's been happening here. So it felt good. So I went. I'm currently taking a printmaking class, alongside a film appreciation class, which is it was an online class, but whatever, okay, nonetheless, at least I was busy now. So one day I was getting prepared to leave. Literally, right when I was about to leave the door, all of a sudden he started getting a weird hand, like a cramp in his hand, and he tries to kind of fix it. He was gripping on it. Then all of a sudden he just collapsed on the floor, and he just had like a huge, massive seizure. Like he was seizing up. So I was like, and now this might sound weird. It's like when someone has a seizure, it's like I kind of knew I knew what you had to do. I mean, don't ask me how I know. I mean, I had an employee that I used to work with who had a history of seizures, and I remember that she did had one right before the store ended up closing. So I already knew what that was like, but I remember it was pretty bad. I mean, we were talking like, you know, foam at the mouth, and he had blood coming out as well. So even though I knew he was having a seizure, deep down, I generally thought that he was going to die. I really did, because it's like we already been through so much, and he's already sick to begin with. I can't. It's so hard for me to kind of see him recover from it. So I wasn't too sure what was going to happen after. I was quick, I was able to call 911. I managed to put the dog somewhere so that they wouldn't interfere with the paramedics. So they did their thing. He left, and obviously I couldn't make it to class. I had to call my professor and let her know. Obviously I had to call my mother and let her know what happened. So again, yeah, there goes another day for me. Going through all that, and now I'm thinking like, what's going to happen? Oddly, I get a call from my aunt, and she's there at the hospital. I mean, obviously, my mother, she works at another town, so it's hard for her to go from there to the hospital. But she was on her way at the time, and my aunt, she had called me. And she was asking me if I was okay, and that he was awake. He was fine. That's the thing. He doesn't remember what happened. It's almost like, it's like he doesn't remember the entire thing. The only thing that he remembers is that his tongue was like kind of swollen, because when you have a seizure you bite down, so that's where blood was coming from. I guess when that was happening, he bit down so hard he just started spitting up blood and stuff like that. So of course he got a lot of pain from that. Now he was more worried about me and the dogs than anything, so I was like, he just had a seizure. I'm like, at least knowing that he was awake and they're taking care of him, at least at least they could go, they could do their thing and all that. And for the most part, I mean, this is gonna sound really, really weird. I don't know. Listen, our healthcare system is really whack, because literally he came home the same day, later that night. So I was like, did they do anything to him? Like, honestly, I was unsatisfied. I was more upset than anything else. I was like, did they not look into why that happened? Because they run tests. They did the EKG. They did everything you could think of, and it's like, I guess they didn't find anything, and it's like, so it just happened. I'm like, well, no. I'm like, there has to be an explanation for that. Let me close this stupid current. You don't just get one like that out of nowhere. You get it, and I mean, I guess, I don't know how common it is for people to have seizures, but I guess for the most part, I'm guessing that this was just one of those, it's least likely to happen again, but it probably can. It's just something that sort of happened. I mean, from what I've been told, I guess his sugar levels was just through the roof or so, and that's what caused it. I don't know. But like I said, he came back home the same day that he had it. So I'm like, I was scared to death. I was like, what if this happens again? I'm like, wait a minute, this is not good. Something went wrong here. Now, and then the thing that I don't understand either is that apparently they said that if I wasn't there to call 911 and stuff, he could have possibly died. So I'm like, doesn't that give you more of a reason to check him out to make sure that he's fine and that this doesn't happen again, or at least give him some kind of medication? Because as you can tell, that this was just ridiculous, that this whole thing kind of happened like that. So I don't know. I don't know how to really, like, again, I'm almost like processing like event after event. So I'm like, so I guess for the most part, everything, I don't know. Sure, yeah, he was, obviously he was a little upset, he's wondering why that happened too. Of course, he has to go see the doctor and all that. He's seeing a whole bunch of people now, but he's still trying to figure out how that happened. And I'm really hoping that it's just stress. I'm hoping that that's just what it is and that it's something more serious. Yeah, that's all that I can really say about it. It didn't help that literally 1 month later he would end up in the hospital again, but due to something completely different. And I think it has to do with his breathing, but I think we got that under control because it was nothing even substantially bad. I think, again, it just has to do with him having these sort of like panic attacks in a sense. I think what happened is that ever since that happened to him with the seizure and all that and all the stress from last year, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe it kind of got to him in a sense, and of course now his health is unfortunately paying the price for it. And, we try to help him out and stuff too, but it's like, he just gets more upset than anything. It's like his mindset now is that he constantly thinks that something's going to happen, and we try to help him out too, but you can only really help someone for so long. So it's like, I mean, we'll be there for him, but it's like, yeah, you got to understand too, you got to take care of yourself, but you can only really do that for so long. I mean, I feel like maybe to a certain extent he does take it serious because, he tries to eat a little better and stuff, but that's still kind of a struggle. So as you can imagine, this whole thing is just a huge, like, clusterfuck. It's like, you could probably tell why I haven't really been, like, uploading anything and all that. As you could tell, my I don't know, my joy, I guess, to upload videos on YouTube and stuff, it just, I guess, sort of disappeared. I just didn't really feel like doing it anymore. It was like, I'm already stressed out as is with everything. It seemed like everything was just kind of going wrong. And mind you, I was still looking for a job at the time. Obviously, still dealing with all of this, and it's like it just felt like the future was just so uncertain. So yeah, I got very depressed. You know, I got pretty sad for a while. So I was even considering just quitting YouTube too, as well, because I was like, I didn't really see a point in it. And you guys know they did took away my monetization. Even though I was not making anything to begin with, they came up with the most stupidest reason saying that I reuse content. But it's like, you didn't even tell me what I reuse. I just assumed that maybe, like, I don't know if I uploaded a meme and stuff like that, but it's like, your algorithm is shit. So how am I supposed to make anything and then expect it to get views when they really don't? So it's like, you try to work around it the best way you can. So as you can imagine, it's like, no, I generally thought of just leaving YouTube altogether, and I wasn't even gonna make like a video or anything. I was just kind of leave it at that. That was the initial plan, but I figure, no, these are just bad chapters that we all have. So I figured that things would get a little better later on. So I didn't want to just jump to the conclusion that things were just going to get worse. I don't like to do that. So I mean, I'm here now. So all right, I do feel a lot more better now in a sense. I feel better, and like I feel great in some ways now, but I still struggle from time to time with all the other stuff. I mean, the thing with the moving process, that's done. That's in the past. So thankfully that's over. My mother, she's fine. She's good. She still works. Same as always. Everything's good with that. So she's fine. Obviously the thing with my dad, it's like, on top of the health, getting worried and all that, and obviously, of course, from time to time, there is still a little bit of tension. So it's like, I don't know. Right now, I'm kind of going through that struggle where it's like, I don't want to have no like regrets thinking about like my dad in a certain way, but it's like it gets hard from time to time. So I can only imagine there's a lot of people that struggle with that too, but still. So yeah. In college, it helps me out surprisingly. I enjoyed it a lot. And I make friends along the way. So I think that's best thing. It was good for me in a sense. So now that I feel slightly more better, I also got back into my art recently as well. So that helps out a lot as well. Uh, you know, Try to enjoy myself a little bit from time to time, but that's really about it for now. For the most part, I think I explained everything. I obviously this video was going to be super long to begin with, so I don't expect everyone to tune in. So it's okay if you miss out on anything at all. This is a video that this is a more personal video that I just wanted to make and get it out of the way. Uh, yeah, we talked about a lot of crazy things today, but I just wanted to kind of get off my chest. And hopefully, like I said, this is supposed to be kind of like a new beginning for the channel. I'm hoping that we could finally get back to what we were doing before, but also doing a couple of new stuff here and there. I got a lot of topics that I want to talk about. There's so many things that I want to kind of explore. I would like to introduce my art at some point on the channel, but I don't think we're there yet. Only because I was gone for such a long time that my view count did diminish pretty badly. So it's like, okay, I'm really gonna have to start pumping up some content again, same way that I was before, so that way we could get back on track. Because I don't blame anyone for leaving, but at the same time, it's like I was generally going through a rough time. So even though those rough times are over in a sense, obviously, like I said, there is a struggle from time to time. So I'm hoping that after that, things will be a lot more smoother from here. I mean, now that the summer is about to come up pretty soon, I do have plans for what I want to do, not just with YouTube, but, I want to start going out a little bit more. So, and again, expect some different stuff here and there from the channel. I want to kind of start exploring a little bit more. I don't always want to make it about toys either. I try to get into video games and all that. And of course, art is something that I would like to also implement as well. And of course, like I said, this is a channel that does a variety of things. So I'm hoping, we'll see how that kind of goes. Obviously not everything is for everyone, but that's that's just how it is. So that's about it. I don't think you guys want to hear me no more. So I know it's we're about to hit 45 minutes pretty soon, but I pretty much said everything. At least thank you guys for at least somewhat tuning in. Just at least this is just me explaining my absence, and hopefully from here on things will be a little more better. Like I said, this video is not intended, it's not a mandatory watch. It's just something that I just wanted to kind of do. So that's about it for now. So I'll see you guys in a more better, lighthearted video. So see you guys next time.